Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and for those of you who are not familiar with the show, the purpose of the Umoja Circle is to correct errors where errors are found, and to introduce facts where we find that so many people are functioning on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. I focus on my people because that's a topic that many people avoid, even many of us, when it comes to the history of people of African descent in America. But in order to heal yourself, you must face those truths. That's what I feel. In order to have a shift in consciousness, it's only through dialogue. Okay, so again, correcting errors where errors are found, and introducing facts that, it might be difficult sometimes, the facts, but they are the truth, and we need to heal that in order to know why we function the way we function. This is a two-part show. Well, actually, this is the fourth show. I'm dealing on medical issues when it comes to people of African descent. Two shows ago, I had a guest here, Sister Mama Tracy Brooks, who we talked about the stresses that we have to deal with as a black people in America that we still have to deal with. And she had a certain type of techniques that is an alternate way of taking pills, which allows you to release the stress. The last show of this two-part series, I talked on this topic here. I'm going to put a book out. It's called The Medical Apartheid, which I want people to understand that this book shows that I have the copy here. You will see that it's a very thick book. And when you read this book, American Apartheid, it talks about the experiments that were done on people of African descent, enslaved people from colonial times. If you didn't know that, now you know. The Hippocratic oath in the medical field is do no harm, but there was harm done to us. You had to look at us in a different way. And that's that's why I introduced, a particular case that's found in the book is J. Marion Sims. He's known as the father of gynecology because he created certain surgical procedures for females who have what they call fistulas and these pieces of equipment. I went into detail a little bit more on the previous shows, but these are called speculums. And anybody who's gone to a gynecologist know what a speculum is. Every female understand that. But one of the things I wanted to bring about was not the fact of those equipment he did, about the humans that were affected by his experimentation. That was black women, enslaved black women who had to, there's a picture of one, I showed in the last image, a sister. I mean, it looks kind of sterile, but it was not that sterile as that picture made you feel. Those two white men, he would hire men to hold them down while he did the kind of experimentation, repeated experimentations over and over and over to perfect certain techniques, to utilize certain apparatus that he created without any anesthesia, without any painkiller. They had to deal with the pain, and these men had to hold these women down. There were three sisters that I honored by name, okay, in the previous shows, because they were his favorites, that he would repeatedly do these kind of experimentations. Now you got animal lovers who were upset by what the perfume people were doing with experimentation on animals in dermatology in the skin a couple of decades ago. I remember that when I was younger. But these were done on people that looked like me. It wasn't just women, but there were experimentations on whether we could stand pain, whether we could stand heat, all kinds of stuff that were written in medical books that were taught to doctors of that time. And only recently, that medical schools did not started, some of the remnants are still in medical, in the way we are done or looked at because of papers that were written that says we only couldn't be given certain medications, or we're different enough so certain medication won't work for us, or we denied. Okay, there were also radiations experiments done with us in the 50s. So this book will open your eyes to a lot of things that if you're wondering why black people are hesitant, it ain't because we are irrational people. We're not stupid. We have a horrendous history when it comes to something that should be honored and we should be willing to accept. But because of the way we were treated, not as a full human being, but as 3/5 of a human being from the Constitution, and all the other ways we were treated by law in this country. Let's talk about trauma. I'm going to introduce this book, Post-Traumatic Slave Trauma. Trauma in an individual over time can look like personality. Trauma in a family over time can look like family traits. This is just the way the Joneses have. Trauma in the people over time can look like a culture. And a lot of things that we have that are cultural came out of a system of enslavement. We got to understand that. Traumatic slavery. When you have a child that was sold, okay, or you have a woman, and I can't use the word women because I don't think they waited for them to turn 18 when I'm talking about black women who were raped by slaveholders or just white men. Could you imagine a slave master one Saturday evening coming to Slave Row and knocking on your door as a enslaved person, and you have a pretty 12-year-old or 13-year-old daughter, and your master come in there and says, I'm going to come and take Lulu, and I'm going because I got guests who are interested, they like him young. What would you do as a father? What would you do as a mother? How could you? But this was going on hundreds and hundreds of years. Now, you think I might be exaggerating when I talk about, what we would consider rape, because don't tell me that Sally Hemings had the right to tell Jefferson that no, okay? In fact, Sally Hemings was basically his sister-in-law. She was his wife, father, was the father of Sally Hemings and her brothers and other family members. And you imagine what would happen to those family members if a master says, and she was inherited because even women didn't have that much right. Whatever, she was the enslaved property of his wife, who when he married her became his property, and he became her master, and she had many children by him. And she didn't start when she was 20 years old. He didn't start when she was 20 years old or 18. She was 13 or 14 years old, okay, when she started having babies for Jefferson. And he was not alone. This was going on all over the country at the time. That was the power that white men had over our black women and our black bodies, and the trauma of that. And that's just one aspect, okay? Not only the raping, but the selling of children or the property, because that's what you were listed as when you had any kind of census. And if you think that I'm exaggerating, there is the census of the I think the 1850 or the 1860, either 1850 or 1860 census showed that there were 600,000 mixed babies born in the United States in the previous 10 years. That was more, I would think, more likely in the 1850s. 600,000 black, well, they would be considered property, mixed babies, mixed race babies, white men and black women. Because after the Constitution, gotta admit, they said that trafficking and slavery would end in 1808. Okay? But how could you have, by 1808, they will stop, the transport, even though there was still transport of slave ships well into the 1860s. In fact, Lincoln ordered the execution of a New England captain who was still bringing in slaves, and that was in the 1860s. But by law, it's supposed to end. That's what they told themselves, the so-called founding fathers, in 1808. Okay? But there were baby mills, just like you have puppy mills today. Okay? There were baby mills being generated because the slave population blew up between 1808 and the Civil War. There were jobs given to white college students who were going to, Ivy League schools in the North. If you wanted to get a good job, you go down in the South and to one of these baby wheels and impregnate one of these, so that your so-called genetic makeup would be passed on, so that baby, just like you do horses in Kentucky, studying, which was part of the job that you could get as a white male in the summer. I know these things sound horrible, but they were horrible. And the trauma, and that's what that book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, is talking about. How could you deal, this book right here with Dr. Joy DeGruy, how could you deal with 400 years of that type of environment? And if you don't think that it could be passed down from generation to generation, currently there are two fields of knowledge that's just coming out in the last decade or so, and that is called epigenetics. Look it up. Epigenetics means above the genes. In other words, there's something that triggers, turns on, or turn off certain genes process. Genes are like blueprints, okay? And they tell you, whether you have blue eyes or brown eyes, or you're going to be pretty athletic, fast twitch muscles, or whatever it is, that's the blueprint for it, okay? And whether you get it or not is whether that particular gene is turned on or turned off. But they're finding out now that the environment that you're in can also turn on, turn off the gene process. So you can imagine a slave environment, hundreds of years, 246 years, 1619 to 1865, of trauma. You could be a free black in Charleston. Yeah, we had free blacks in the North and the South. But look, we got free brothers and sisters walking around America. But look at these video clips of black men who are just walking in the neighborhoods, the young black boys like Trayvon Martin going to get Skittles and being attacked by white. You think it was even worse back in the, in the 1800s, early 1800s, 1820s, 1830s? Even in the North, the first police department came in I think it was 38 in Boston. The first one that looks like what we would consider a modern uniform police department. You think that they looked at the black community in the Boston area or the New York area or the Philly area where other police departments started to come out? Or did they treat them no different than the original policing of black people were done by who had badges were called slave patrol or patty rollers? A totally different environment. Trauma in people over time look like culture because you had to have certain behavioral pattern developed just to survive. we see Dr. DeGruy did an experiment as part of this book. This book came out, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome came out in 2006. She got 4 degrees, okay? So this is, and one of them is psychological research. And she noted, she focused on us. So any of you people, you brothers and sisters who are now going to school in psychology, psychiatry, counseling, or even medical school, yeah, your people have a whole lot of issues you could specialize in when you focus on us as a people. I'm not saying other people don't have these issues. Okay, we live in America. There's the American pressures of being an American, loss of jobs, that spreads across the gambit. But people of African descent have had a unique history that we need to address to this day. If you're wondering what you're seeing on TV, on videos, and why we act the way we act, or why we respond the way we respond, understand that the mind of a people, we all carry the mind of those who come before us. And with the information that is now coming out with epigenetics, we got to understand that there's certain behavioral patterns that, that are passed on. We are understanding the horrors of PTSD through our military. There were studies done on the Jews who went through the Holocaust as a people. I think it was also on Japanese internment, and there were studies done. But there was nothing done on the effects of enslavement on people of African descent, okay? We had 246 years of stress-inducing trauma from 1865. Then we were told, okay, you're free. Did we get any kind of psychological counseling? Any economic help? A little bit where the aspect of the 40 acres of the mule came out of what happened when Sherman ended up on the coast when he went through the South, okay, on his disappearing act and his, tearing up railroads and doing all these things. He ended up in Savannah, and he called together all the black preachers that came out at a hotel in Savannah, Georgia, where he finally met the Union ships. And he asked them, what do you need? And they said, we need land. And we don't need anything else. Just leave us some land. And he made a special order. I forgot the number of the special order, but you can look that up, Google it. And the mule, and since they had army mules, excess of army mules, each person was supposed to get that a mule, and they were supposed to make it in 40-acre lots. And this is where Hilton Head is, all along the eastern seaboard, going all the way down to northern Florida. From the Mississippi, going all the way down into Florida. That's where we get the mythology of the 40 acres and a mule. Of course, that was kiboshed, okay, by Johnson, who came after Lincoln. But we were given nothing. On top of that, you had the betrayal in which, our once allies, radical Republicans, who got the 13, 14, and 15 Amendment passed in the late 1860s and early 1870s, with the relatively behaved Samuel J. Tilden kibosh, in which they agreed to withdraw the troops, leaving our black people in South Carolina, Virginia, all the Confederate states, where we were getting through Reconstruction our act together and our schools and all that. They left us hanging. And then you had the rise of the Ku Klux Klan and all the black codes that were starting to come back in, and we had another 100 years of apartheid and the trauma of apartheid. So 246 years of rapes and selling of our children and other and medical atrocities being done to us. Then another 100 years of black codes and separate but unequal schooling. 390-something years of that going just until Brown versus the Board of Education in my lifetime, and then we're supposed to think that we're not traumatized people? That we're not going to have certain behavioral patterns that came out of that melange of terror that was the American dream? This is the truth we got to face, folks. This is the reality. The fact that we're still here, the fact that I'm sitting here, with my mind intact, but hey, I got issues. There's another series of let me see. Another series of findings that came out that I want to talk about it real quick. Yeah, we have post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay. Certain behavioral patterns that mirrors what soldiers are going through from 20 years of war in Afghanistan, 14 years of war in Vietnam and World War II, Korea. We know about all those things and we understand it. That's why that book is similar in name, Post-Traumatic Slave Disorder, because we were suffering from that as a feeling, as a people, long ago. There's certain behavioral patterns that you can find in any slave if you actually look at what they had to do. These are the symptoms of PTSD, some of them. A feeling of foreshortened future. How many black young men you hear during the crack era, I'm getting mine now because I'm not going to live. Well, blood or crack. That's a feeling of foreshortened future. An exaggerated startle response. Shooting each other. Okay? Outbursts of anger. Difficulty falling asleep. Hypervigilance. You go into any crack-infested or stress-infected black community, you'll find all these symptoms of PTSD. When you look at some of these videos when a brother or sister are stopped by the police, and one of those traffic stops, a myriad of them, the behavior of the person is, hypervigilance. He's following me, right? Constantly looking in the back. They're angry. What did I do? Blah, 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 which is his right, but there's this outburst of anger. I learned when I was studying our language of ebonics, which is another show, I listened to a lecture by the person who came up with the terminology African centricity. Okay, he was talking about ebonics. He was, teaching a lecture, and he said something that really, really stuck with me. He said there's two ways in which white people deal with how we communicate in body language, and black people. Black people always, if you got something that you were accused of that was wrongly, in our culture, which come out of enslavement, because you got to prove to massa that you didn't do what that master was talking about, you're going to have a sense of outrage. Me? No, heck no. You see how we respond. But to a white person, that looks guilty. Just like to a white cop, when that brother or sister is talking about, I didn't do anything. I was blah, blah, blah. They call for backup. This person's acting strange. They're not aware of the cultural nuances that was passed down and reinforced by the environments that we're constantly facing in this post-traumatic slave symptoms that came from a society that's constantly questioning us. What you doing here? Where you going? Who you going to be with? Constantly, hundreds and hundreds of years, where a white person would always be cool and calm. Well, let me see talk to your manager. If a black person say that, it's just part of he will say it in a tense way. See, a black person would look at that, if another black person would act like that he's hiding something. You see, we both see certain behavioral patterns differently that came out of a historical reality that we don't talk about. Black people will have a sense of outrage, which is normal for us, which was rolled into our culture. Okay, the actions of one generation becomes the history of the next generation. The history of the next number of generations becomes the culture of the people. And if the history and the actions of enslaved people to survive, to disregard the attitude of a slave mother when master asks about the brightness of her young son, she downgrades and denigrates her boy, not because she hates him, but because she understands that he would be of value to master in a few years, and she's just protecting her child. And that behavior you could find in certain black families. Oh, you know, when a brother or sister is a young child is oh, she's just too fast for herself, or she just this or that. We have carried some of those negative behaviors to this very day that we need to get rid of. But until we address those things, we got to understand the behavior of post-traumatic slave syndrome is no different than the behaviors of post-traumatic stress disorders found in our soldiers. We finally addressed those things because it was going on long. There's been soldiers going back thousands of years. They've been suffering from that. We give it a name. But we have not addressed what the psychological trauma that was done to raped women who have to carry the rapist's child to term. Stressed out black men who cannot be men in a society that looked at them as boys. Can't get the same American dream that the dominant group can get, even if you have a GI Bill. We must understand these traumas and give the voice to that. That's all I'm doing. I'm not a research scientist, but our history is real. This book. And one last book that you want to read is My Grandmother's Hands. It's another one that further goes into detail about the dramas that we have to deal with as black people. But I got to go. So until next time, peace, hotep, bye-bye.